Most people do not realize they are running a race. They wake up early. They work hard. They pay their bills. They try to save a little when they can. Year after year, they do everything they were told responsible adults are supposed to do. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet anxiety follows them everywhere. Will there be enough? Enough money for emergencies. Enough money for retirement. Enough money to help the people they love. Enough money to live without fear. For many people, that question never disappears. In fact, it often grows louder with age. The strange thing is that this anxiety rarely comes from laziness or a lack of effort. Most people work incredibly hard. The problem is that effort alone was never the secret. Millions of people spend decades running faster and faster while never realizing they are on the wrong track. They were taught how to earn money. They were never taught how to make money work for them. School teaches us how to get a job. Society teaches us how to spend. Advertising teaches us how to want more. But very few people are ever taught how wealth is actually built. Not the flashy version sold in headlines and social media posts. Not the fantasy of overnight success. The real version. The quiet version. The version built through simple decisions repeated consistently over long periods of time. The truth is that financial freedom is not reserved for geniuses, entrepreneurs, or people born into wealth. It is not hidden behind complicated formulas or secret investment strategies. It is built through understanding a handful of timeless principles and having the discipline to let those principles work for you. This book is about those principles. It is about creating a system so simple that you can trust it, so practical that you can follow it, and so powerful that it can change the direction of your entire financial future. The system is called the Freedom Portfolio. It is not a trading strategy. It is not a prediction machine. It is not a shortcut to instant riches. It is a framework for turning income into assets, assets into wealth, and wealth into freedom. Because at its core, money is not really about money. Money is about options. It is about being able to walk away from work you hate. It is about sleeping peacefully during uncertain times. It is about knowing that an unexpected setback will not destroy everything you have built. It is about creating a future that belongs to you. Everything that follows is designed to help you build that future. But before we construct the Freedom Portfolio, we must first understand why so many intelligent, hardworking people never reach financial freedom despite decades of effort. The answer has very little to do with intelligence and almost everything to do with the beliefs, habits, and systems they were given. And that is where our journey begins. Chapter 1. Why most people never build wealth, and why that is not their fault. Let us begin with something that almost nobody says out loud, but almost everyone feels. Most people who grow up in ordinary households, in ordinary neighborhoods, with ordinary parents doing their best, never receive a single meaningful lesson about money. Not one. They learn to read. They learn basic mathematics. They learn the names of rivers, and the dates of wars, and the periodic table of elements. But they do not learn how compound interest works. They do not learn the difference between an asset and a liability. They do not learn why some people seem to accumulate wealth effortlessly, while others work just as hard, or harder, and somehow never get ahead. This is not an accident. The absence of financial education in the lives of ordinary people is, in many ways, a feature rather than a flaw of the systems that surround us. A population that does not understand money is a population that is easier to sell things to, easier to keep working long hours for wages that never quite stretch far enough, and easier to keep distracted with consumer goods that feel like prosperity but are actually its opposite. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is simply an observation about incentives. The companies that profit from your financial confusion have very little motivation to reduce that confusion. So most people arrive at adulthood carrying a bundle of beliefs about money that were absorbed rather than chosen. Some of these beliefs were inherited from parents who were themselves never taught. Some came from watching advertising that equated spending with happiness and status with worth. Some came from painful early experiences with debt or scarcity that created deep emotional associations with money, associations of fear, of shame, of overwhelm. And some simply came from the culture at large, which tends to celebrate the flashy display of wealth while quietly ignoring the patient, boring, deeply effective habits that actually create it. The result is a population of adults who are financially anxious, financially underinformed, and financially stuck. Not because they lack ambition, not because they lack intelligence, but because they were handed a set of tools that were never designed to help them build anything lasting. The first and most important thing this book will do is give you a new set of tools. But before we can talk about the tools themselves, we need to talk about the beliefs that might make it hard to pick them up and use them. Because even the best system in the world will not work if the person using it is quietly convinced that wealth is for other people, that it is too late for them, that they do not understand finances well enough to ever really get a grip on them, that money is complicated and dangerous and best left to experts. Let us take those beliefs apart, one by one, and leave them on the floor where they belong. The first belief is the belief that wealth is only for the privileged. This belief has a kernel of truth inside it, which is what makes it so sticky. It is true that people who are born into wealthy families have enormous structural advantages. It is true that systems of inequality exist and that they create real and measurable barriers for many people. None of that is being dismissed here. But the belief becomes destructive when it becomes a reason to stop trying, when it transforms from a social observation into a personal conclusion, when it shifts from "the system is unfair," which is accurate, to "there is nothing I can do," which is not. Because the historical record is full, absolutely full, of people who started with very little and built extraordinary financial security through patient, consistent action. Not through luck, not through a single big break, through system, through habit, through time. The second belief is the belief that it is too late to start. This one is fascinating because it is almost universally held and almost universally wrong. People in their 20s think they should have started in their teens. People in their 30s think they should have started in their 20s. People in their 40s think the window has closed. And people in their 50s and 60s think they are simply too far behind to matter. But the mathematics of long-term investing are far more forgiving than this belief allows. A person who begins building their portfolio at 40 and continues consistently for 20 or 25 years can absolutely build meaningful financial freedom. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. This saying exists because it is true, and it is especially true about money. The third belief is the belief that you need to understand complicated financial instruments to build wealth. This belief is perhaps the most damaging of all, because it is the most effective at keeping people paralyzed. The financial industry has done a masterful job of convincing ordinary people that wealth building is complex, that it requires sophisticated analysis, that it involves constant monitoring and expert guidance and products that only professionals truly understand. And while there are certainly complex financial instruments in the world, the extraordinary truth is that the most powerful and reliable wealth-building method ever discovered requires almost no complexity at all. It requires patience. It requires consistency. It requires a basic understanding of a handful of principles. And it requires the willingness to trust a process even when the market is being frightening. The fourth belief, and perhaps the quietest one, is the belief that you do not deserve financial security. This belief rarely announces itself directly. It lives in the background, in the form of self-sabotage, in the habit of spending money as soon as it arrives, in the feeling of discomfort when money starts to accumulate, in the vague but persistent sense that wealth is for people who are somehow more deserving, more disciplined, more worthy. This belief often has roots in childhood, in the messages received, spoken or unspoken, about who your family was and what your family was allowed to have. It is worth examining honestly, because no financial system, no matter how elegant or effective, can do its work if the person running it is unconsciously undermining it at every turn. With these beliefs named and examined, we can move forward. Because the truth about building wealth, the truth that this entire book rests on, is remarkably simple. Wealth is not built through complexity. It is built through consistency. It is not built through brilliance. It is built through behavior. And behavior can be learned, shaped, and practiced by anyone willing to take it seriously, including you, including anyone reading these words right now, regardless of where they started, regardless of how old they are, regardless of how many financial mistakes they have already made. The system we are about to build together is called the Freedom Portfolio. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is not a trading strategy. It is not a set of tips for picking winning stocks. It is something quieter and more powerful than any of those things. It is a lifelong relationship with money, built on clarity, simplicity, and compounding time. It is the kind of wealth-building system that does not require you to watch the market every day, does not require expensive advisors, does not require a high income to get started. It requires only a few key decisions, made thoughtfully and early, and then the discipline to let time do what time does best. Before we build that system, though, we need to understand the single most powerful force in all of finance. It is a force so profound that it has been described as the eighth wonder of the world, a force so misunderstood that most people spend their entire lives on the wrong side of it. That force is compound growth. And in the next chapter, we are going to look at it so closely, so simply, and so honestly that you will never think about money or time or your future the same way again. Chapter 2: The Eighth Wonder of the World. There is a story, probably apocryphal but deeply instructive, about a king who was so pleased with the man who invented the game of chess that he offered him any reward he wished. The inventor made a simple request. He asked for 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, 2 grains on the second square, 4 on the third, 8 on the fourth, and so on, doubling with each square, all the way to the 64th square. The king laughed at the modesty of this request and agreed immediately. By the time his mathematicians had finished calculating, the king realized he did not have enough rice in all his kingdom. He did not have enough rice on the entire planet. The number required was greater than 18 quintillion grains. That story is about compound growth. And compound growth is the single most important concept in this entire book. Let us define it as plainly as possible. When you invest money, that money earns a return. When you do not take that return out, but instead leave it in, the return itself begins to earn a return. And then the return on the return earns a return, and so on. At first, this process is invisible. It feels like nothing is happening. The numbers are small, and the progress seems negligible. But time does something extraordinary to this process. Over years and decades, the invisible becomes visible, the small becomes significant, and the negligible becomes extraordinary. Think of it this way. Imagine you put a single unit of money into an investment, and it grows at a rate of 8% per year. After 1 year, you have a little more than that original unit. Not dramatic. After 5 years, you have nearly 1.5 times your original amount. Still modest. After 10 years, you have a little more than twice your original amount. Starting to feel real. After 20 years, you have almost 4.5 times your original amount. After 30 years, you have more than 10 times. After 40 years, you have more than 20 times. All from a single original unit, all without adding another cent. Just time and growth, doing their quiet, patient, relentless work. Now here is where it gets even more powerful, and this is the part that most people miss entirely. The growth is not linear. It does not add a fixed amount each year. It multiplies. The gap between year 30 and year 40 is not the same size as the gap between year 1 and year 10. It is vastly, dramatically larger. This is the nature of exponential growth. Slow and humble at first, then suddenly explosive in ways that feel almost magical. This has a profound implication for anyone thinking about when to start building their freedom portfolio. Every single year of delay does not cost you just 1 year of growth. It costs you the compounded growth of everything that 1 year would have generated over all the remaining decades. A delay of 10 years does not reduce your final outcome by some modest percentage. It can cut it in half, or worse, depending on the time frame and the growth rate involved. The early years are, counterintuitively, the most valuable years of all. Not because the numbers are large then, they are tiny then, but because those early contributions have the most time to compound. Let us look at this from a different angle. Imagine two people. Call the first one, early Elena. She begins investing at 22 years old. She contributes a modest amount each month for 8 years and then stops entirely. She never adds another unit of money. She just leaves what she built in those 8 years to grow. Call the second person, later Lucas. He waits until he is 30 to begin investing, but he is disciplined and patient, and he contributes the same monthly amount as Elena every month, without stopping, for 35 years. He contributes over 4 times as long as Elena did. He puts in vastly more total money. When both of them reach retirement age, who has more money? Elena does, despite contributing for only 8 years, despite never adding a single unit after the age of 30, despite putting in far less total money overall. She wins because her money had more time to compound. The early years that Lucas missed were the years that generated the exponential tail, the long, explosive back end of the compounding curve, and that tail was worth more than all the contributions Lucas made in all the years that followed. This story is not meant to discourage anyone who is starting later in life. It is meant to create a sense of urgency, of beautiful, motivating urgency, for anyone who has been waiting to start. Because every day you wait is a day of compounding that you can never get back. But compound growth has a dark side too, and this is the part that the system in this book is specifically designed to protect you from. Compounding does not only work in your favor, it works in favor of whoever is on the other side of the equation. When you carry debt, especially high-interest debt, the same mathematical force that builds your wealth is actively destroying it. The balance grows. The interest compounds on itself. What started as a manageable amount becomes a mountain. And the mountain grows fastest exactly when you can least afford it. This is why the freedom portfolio begins not with investing, but with clearing the ground. Not with building, but with removing the obstacles that prevent building. Because you cannot outrun compounding that is working against you, no matter how much you contribute to the positive side of the ledger. The negative compounding, if it is powerful enough, will eat everything you try to build. We will talk much more about this in the chapters on debt. For now, hold on to this core truth. Compound growth is the engine of wealth, and your job is to harness it rather than fight it. There is one more aspect of compound growth that deserves careful attention here, and that is the role of the growth rate itself. This might seem obvious, but its implications are often overlooked. The difference between a 6% annual return and an 8% annual return does not feel like much. 2 percentage points, barely anything. But over 40 years, that 2-point difference on a meaningful sum of money creates a gap of almost double. The final outcome of the 8% scenario is nearly twice as large as the 6% scenario. Not a little larger, nearly double. This has direct and important consequences for how we build the freedom portfolio. Because the investment vehicles you choose, the costs those vehicles carry, the taxes you pay, and the behaviors you engage in during market turbulence all affect your effective growth rate, and small changes to that rate, sustained over decades, create enormous differences in outcome. This is why the system we are building pays such careful attention to fees. It is why it pays attention to tax efficiency. It is why it places such emphasis on behavior during downturns. Because every fraction of a percentage point that leaks out of your system through unnecessary costs or panic-driven mistakes is a fraction that compounds against you over every year that remains. The wealthy do not have access to some secret investment that the rest of the world does not know about. The wealthy, or at least the ones who built their wealth through patient investing rather than inherited it or earned it through business ownership, simply understood compound growth earlier, applied it more consistently, and protected it more fiercely from the forces that erode it. And now you understand it too, which means the most important piece of the puzzle is already in your hands. In the next chapter, we are going to begin assembling the Freedom Portfolio itself. We are going to talk about what it is made of, why it is built the way it is, and how to think about its construction in a way that gives you both growth and peace of mind. Because a portfolio that grows beautifully on paper but causes you so much anxiety that you bail out during the first serious market correction is not a portfolio that serves you. The Freedom Portfolio is designed to be something you can actually live with, something you can believe in on the bright days and trust on the dark ones. And that combination of genuine long-term performance and genuine peace of mind is rarer and more valuable than most investors ever realize. Chapter 3: The Freedom Portfolio Explained. Every great system is built around a core idea. The core idea of the Freedom Portfolio is this: you do not need to be clever to build wealth. You need to be consistent. And to be consistent over decades, through recessions and recoveries, through personal crises and global upheavals, through the inevitable moments when fear makes selling feel rational, you need a system that is simple enough to understand deeply, trustworthy enough to stay committed to, and designed well enough to not require constant adjustment. The Freedom Portfolio is built on 4 foundational pillars. Let us name them clearly before exploring each one. The first pillar is diversification. Not spreading your money across 50 different complicated products, but owning a broad slice of the entire market so that no single company, no single sector, no single country can do serious damage to your overall position. The second pillar is low cost. Every unit of money paid in fees is a unit of money removed from your compounding engine. Over decades, the difference between a high-cost investment and a low-cost one is not trivial. It is enormous. The Freedom Portfolio is built to be ruthlessly efficient about cost. The third pillar is consistency. Not trying to time the market, not moving in and out based on headlines or hunches, but contributing regularly and automatically, in good times and bad, allowing the mechanics of compounding and the natural patterns of market behavior to do their work. The fourth pillar is alignment. The portfolio you build must be aligned with your actual timeline, your actual risk tolerance, and your actual life. A portfolio that is technically optimal but emotionally unbearable is a portfolio that will be abandoned the first time the market drops sharply. The Freedom Portfolio is designed to be a portfolio you can live with for life. Let us begin with diversification, because it is probably the concept you have heard most often and the one most in need of honest clarification. When most people hear about diversification, they picture a financial advisor suggesting a complicated mix of different funds, different sectors, different regions, carefully balanced and regularly rebalanced by someone with multiple credentials. The reality, as discovered by decades of financial research, is both simpler and more powerful than that. The most effective form of diversification available to ordinary investors is simply owning the whole market. Think about it this way. The stock market, in any given country, is made up of hundreds or thousands of individual companies. Some of those companies will succeed brilliantly over the next decade. Some will fail entirely. Some will muddle along. And the extraordinary thing is that predicting which will do, which is, for virtually all investors, and even most professionals, essentially impossible on a consistent basis. But here is the beautiful part. You do not have to predict. Because if you own a tiny slice of all of them, the ones that succeed spectacularly will carry your portfolio up. The ones that fail will have only a tiny impact because of how small a portion of your holdings they represent. And the overall result will closely track the performance of the market as a whole. And the market as a whole, over long periods of time, goes up. There will be crashes. There will be years, sometimes several in a row, when the market falls sharply and painfully. But the long-term trend, sustained over every meaningful historical period in major economies, is upward. Not always gently upward, not without terrifying drops and agonizing recoveries, but upward. And if you own the whole market, that upward trend works for you entirely. This is the principle behind index funds, and index funds are the primary building block of the Freedom Portfolio. An index fund is simply a fund that buys every company in a particular market index, weighted by size, and holds them all. There is no manager making clever decisions. There is no team of analysts researching individual stocks. There is just a mechanical, automatic holding of the entire market. And this simplicity is not a weakness. It is the source of two enormous advantages. The first advantage is cost. Because there are no expensive managers or analysts to pay, index funds charge dramatically lower fees than actively managed funds. And as we have already established, lower fees mean more money staying in your compounding engine, which means more money for you over time. The difference in outcomes between a high-fee active fund and a low-fee index fund, sustained over 30 or 40 years, is not a rounding error. It is, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of units of wealth. The second advantage is performance. This is the part that feels counterintuitive, but is thoroughly supported by decades of research. The average actively managed fund does not outperform its benchmark index over the long term. In fact, the majority of active funds underperform the index, even before fees are considered, and the underperformance becomes more severe after fees are accounted for. There are years when individual active funds beat the market, but sustaining that outperformance over decades is something that almost none of them manage to do. And identifying in advance which active fund will be the one to beat the market consistently is, in practice, impossible. The research on this is not new or controversial among serious financial academics. It is widely established and has been widely confirmed. The conclusion is clear. For most investors, most of the time, a low-cost index fund will outperform the vast majority of actively managed alternatives, not because of skill on the part of the investor, but because of the mathematical reality of fees compounding negatively and the statistical difficulty of sustained active outperformance. Yet the financial industry continues to sell actively managed funds at scale because they are more profitable for the industry, not for the customer. So the Freedom Portfolio is built primarily from index funds. Specifically, from a small number of very broadly diversified, very low-cost index funds that together provide exposure to the full global market. We do not need 20 different funds. We do not need complicated sector allocations. We need a handful of simple building blocks, chosen wisely and held patiently for as long as possible. Now, let us talk about the second major building block, bonds. Bonds are, in simple terms, loans that you make to governments or large corporations in exchange for regular interest payments and the return of your principal at the end of a fixed period. They behave very differently from stocks. Where stocks can lose large amounts of value quickly during economic downturns, bonds tend to be more stable. They do not grow as fast as stocks over the long term, but they also do not fall as sharply. This makes them a stabilizing force in a portfolio. The reason the Freedom Portfolio includes bonds is behavioral as much as mathematical. A portfolio that is invested entirely in stocks will grow faster over very long periods of time, but it will also drop more sharply during market crashes. And sharp drops are emotionally very hard for most people to endure. The investor who has 100% of their money in stocks and watches it lose a third or more of its value in a single year faces a powerful psychological pull to sell, to get out, to stop the pain. And selling during a crash is perhaps the single most destructive financial mistake a long-term investor can make, because it turns a temporary paper loss into a permanent real loss, and it guarantees that the investor will not be fully invested during the recovery that follows. Bonds smooth the ride. They reduce the worst falls. They provide psychological ballast during storms. And for investors in or near the stage of their lives where they need to begin drawing on their wealth, they provide genuine capital protection that all stock portfolios cannot. The classic formula for determining the right allocation between stocks and bonds has been updated many times over the years, but a useful starting framework is that your allocation to stocks should reflect your timeline and your genuine emotional tolerance for volatility. Younger investors with decades ahead of them can afford to hold very high proportions of stocks, knowing that any crash they experience will be followed by a recovery long before they need to access the money. Older investors, closer to the point of drawing on their wealth, should hold more bonds, accepting slightly lower long-term growth in exchange for greater stability. This is not a fixed rule. It is a framework. And the Freedom Portfolio is flexible enough to be adjusted as your life changes, as your timeline shortens, and as your priorities evolve. What matters is not finding the single mathematically perfect allocation, but finding one that you understand, believe in, and can actually stay committed to through the entire arc of your investing life. There is also a third asset class worth mentioning here, though it plays a smaller role in the Freedom Portfolio for most investors: real estate. Real estate, in the form of actual physical properties, or in the form of funds called real estate investment trusts, which allow you to own a fraction of large-scale commercial real estate without buying an entire building, can be a valuable addition to a portfolio for certain investors. It behaves differently from both stocks and bonds. It can provide income in the form of rent or dividends, and it has its own compounding potential that over long periods can be significant. Real estate investment trusts, in particular, are accessible to investors of almost any size. They are highly liquid compared to actual physical property, and they provide a degree of diversification within the portfolio that purely financial assets cannot replicate. Whether they belong in your Freedom Portfolio and in what proportion depends on your personal situation. We will explore this in detail in a later chapter. For now, the core structure is clear: a broad stock index fund, or a combination of a few, a bond index fund, appropriately sized for your timeline and temperament, and potentially a real estate investment trust component for additional diversification and income. This is the Freedom Portfolio, simple in structure, powerful in practice, and designed to function as a wealth-building engine that runs quietly in the background of your life, requiring minimal intervention, generating maximum long-term return, and providing the kind of steady, reliable growth that, over decades, genuinely changes what your future looks like. In the next chapter, we will talk about where to hold this portfolio, because the accounts in which you invest are nearly as important as what you invest in, and making smart choices about account structure can add meaningfully to your long-term wealth through the power of tax efficiency. Chapter 4. The Tax Advantage: Keeping More of What You Grow. There is a silent partner in every investment account. You have probably heard of this partner. This partner does not contribute any money. This partner does not take any risk. This partner is not subject to any losses. But when your investments grow, this partner shows up to take a portion of the gains. That partner is the tax authority. This is not a book about tax avoidance or about doing anything improper. Taxes fund the services that make stable societies possible, and most people pay them willingly in that spirit. But there is a profound and entirely legal difference between paying the taxes you owe and paying more taxes than the law requires you to pay. And millions of investors do exactly that, not out of civic generosity, but simply out of ignorance about the account structures that allow their investments to grow in far more tax-efficient ways. The good news is that in most developed economies, the tax authorities have created special account types specifically designed to encourage citizens to save and invest for their future. These accounts offer what is possibly the single most valuable free gift available to any investor: the ability to let your investments compound without paying tax on the gains until much later, or in some cases, without ever paying tax on the gains at all. The mechanics vary by country, but the core principle is almost universal. There are accounts where your contributions come from pre-tax income, meaning you get a tax deduction today. Your investments grow tax-free inside the account, and you pay tax only when you withdraw the money in retirement. This is one model. There are also accounts where your contributions come from after-tax income, meaning you get no deduction today, but your investments grow completely tax-free inside the account, and you pay absolutely no tax when you withdraw in retirement. This is the other model. Both types of accounts are extraordinarily powerful. The choice between them depends largely on whether you believe your tax rate will be higher now or higher in retirement. If you expect to be in a higher tax bracket in the future, paying tax now on your contributions and then withdrawing tax-free later is more advantageous. If you expect to be in a lower bracket in retirement, getting the deduction now and paying tax later makes more sense. For most people, building wealth over the long term, a combination of both approaches, contributing to both types of accounts, provides the most protection and flexibility. Because you are hedging against future uncertainty about tax rates, which are determined by governments whose decisions are, to put it charitably, not always predictable. The compounding benefit of tax-advantaged accounts is not subtle. Consider the mathematics. If your investments grow at 8% per year inside a tax-advantaged account, the full 8% compounds without any annual tax drag. If those same investments are held in a regular taxable account, you may owe tax on dividends and capital gains distributions each year, even if you never sell anything. This reduces your effective annual return. And as we have already established, even a small reduction in annual return rate, sustained over decades, creates a dramatically different final outcome. The Freedom Portfolio is built to maximize the use of tax-advantaged account space before any investment is made in taxable accounts. This is not complicated in practice. It simply means funding your available tax-advantaged accounts to the maximum allowed limit each year before putting any additional investment money elsewhere. The limits on these accounts vary by jurisdiction and change periodically, so understanding the current rules in your specific location is important. But the principle is universal. Use every tax-advantaged space available to you before investing in taxable accounts, because the compounding benefit of doing so is enormous. There is an additional strategy worth understanding here, which relates to the placement of different types of investments within different types of accounts. Not all investments generate the same type of tax liability. Some generate a lot of ordinary income in the form of dividends and interest payments. Others generate primarily long-term capital gains, which are usually taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income. And some generate very little taxable income at all on an annual basis, building value primarily through price appreciation that is only realized when you sell. A strategy called tax location, placing the right investments in the right types of accounts to minimize overall tax liability, can add meaningful value over time. As a general principle, investments that generate a lot of ordinary income, like bonds, whose interest payments are taxed as ordinary income, are best held in tax-advantaged accounts where that income can compound without annual taxation. Investments that generate primarily long-term capital gains, like broad stock index funds, may be more suitable for taxable accounts, especially those that are very tax efficient in their structure, generating very few taxable events during the holding period. This is a refinement rather than a foundation, something to optimize once the basic structure is in place, but it is worth understanding because over long periods, the tax savings can be genuinely significant. There is one more tax concept that the Freedom Portfolio addresses, and that is the concept of tax loss harvesting. This is a strategy available in taxable accounts where, during periods when an investment has declined in value, you sell that investment, realize the loss, use that loss to offset taxable gains elsewhere in your portfolio or your tax return, and then reinvest the proceeds in a similar but not identical investment so that your overall portfolio position and risk profile remain essentially unchanged. You keep your market exposure, you reduce your tax bill, and you contribute the savings back into the compounding engine. Tax loss harvesting requires some attention and some understanding of the rules around what constitutes a substantially identical investment, because those rules exist to prevent people from gaming the system. But it is a legitimate and powerful strategy that, for taxable investors with meaningful account sizes, can add a genuine and measurable return improvement over time. Automated investment services now exist that do this harvesting automatically, making it accessible to investors who do not have the time or expertise to manage it manually. Taxes, like fees, are one of the invisible forces that quietly erode the power of your compounding engine if you do not pay attention to them. The Freedom Portfolio pays attention to them. Not obsessively, not in ways that distort the investment strategy, but enough to ensure that the maximum amount of your growth stays inside your portfolio, working for your future, rather than leaking out in avoidable ways. With the structure of the portfolio established, with the importance of tax-efficient account types understood, we can now turn to a question that many investors find more difficult than any of the technical details: how much to invest, when to invest it, and how to maintain the discipline to keep doing so through every kind of market weather. Chapter 5: The Automatic Wealth Machine. There is a version of wealth building that looks exhausting. It involves carefully analyzing the market each week, moving money in and out based on what the news is saying, reading dozens of financial reports, attending to your portfolio with the kind of daily attention you might give to a job. And some people do invest this way. But it is not the way the Freedom Portfolio works. And it is not the way that the research on investor behavior suggests leads to the best outcomes. The Freedom Portfolio is designed to be an automatic wealth machine, one that, once set up correctly, runs largely without your interference, benefiting from consistent input and protected from the most dangerous thing in investing, which is not market volatility, but your own emotional responses to market volatility. The mechanism at the heart of the automatic wealth machine is called dollar cost averaging. Do not be put off by the technical sounding name. The concept is beautifully simple. Dollar cost averaging means investing a fixed amount of money at regular intervals, regardless of what the market is doing at that moment. Every month, a set amount goes in. Not sometimes, not when the market looks good. Every month, without fail, automatically. The mathematical effect of this is counterintuitive, but powerful. When markets are high, your fixed contribution buys fewer shares. When markets are low, your fixed contribution buys more shares. Over time, this automatic behavior means that you accumulate more shares during periods of low prices than during periods of high prices, without having to make any active decision about timing. The average price you pay per share over the full course of your investing life is generally lower than the average market price during that same period. You are not trying to buy at the bottom and sell at the top, a strategy that sounds compelling and works almost never in practice. You are simply buying consistently, letting the price fluctuations work slightly in your favor through the mechanical effect of buying more when prices are lower. But the most important benefit of dollar cost averaging is not mathematical at all. It is psychological. When your investment process is fully automatic, When the money moves from your bank account to your investment account on a fixed date each month without any decision required from you, you are protected from the single most destructive investor behavior, the panic response during market crashes. Market crashes are terrifying. There is no other honest way to describe them. When you watch the value of your portfolio fall by 20, 30, or 40%, every instinct in your body tells you to get out. The news is full of dire predictions. Smart-sounding people are explaining why this time is different, why the market might not recover, why selling now and waiting for a clearer picture makes sense. And your brain, which evolved to avoid immediate threats rather than to protect long-term financial plans, is screaming the same message. The evidence on what investors actually do during crashes is heartbreaking. The majority of ordinary investors sell when markets fall. They lock in their losses. They sit on the sidelines holding cash while the market recovers. And then, when the recovery has been underway for long enough that it feels safe again, they buy back in, near the new highs. They bought high, sold low, bought high again, and wondered why they never seemed to get ahead. The automatic wealth machine protects against this pattern. When your contributions are on autopilot, when no active decision is required, you continue investing through crashes without having to override your panic instincts each time. Your automatic monthly investment buys shares at the lower prices that crashes create. And when the recovery comes, as recoveries always have come in the history of major markets, those shares purchased during the downturn are suddenly worth significantly more than you paid for them. This is not a minor point. It is, arguably, the most important practical insight in this entire book. The investor who maintains consistent automated contributions through market downturns does not just avoid the mistake of panic selling. They actively benefit from the downturn in a way that the investor who sells and waits in cash can never recover. The downturn becomes an opportunity, not because you planned it that way, because the system made it inevitable. Now let us talk about how much to invest. This is a question that creates enormous anxiety in many people because there is a version of the answer that sounds like sacrifice and deprivation. But there is another version that sounds like something much more empowering, and that is the version the Freedom Portfolio embraces. The question is not really how much can I afford to save after living my life. The question is, what is the minimum percentage of my income that, invested consistently over time, will create the financial freedom I actually want? And the answer to that question, for many people, is less than they fear. Financial researchers and advisors have developed various guidelines over the years, but a reasonable starting framework suggests that saving and investing somewhere between 10 and 20% of your gross income, depending on when you start and what your goals are, is sufficient to build substantial wealth over a working lifetime. 10% is a starting floor for someone who begins young. Higher percentages are needed for those who start later or have more ambitious targets. But here is the crucial insight. It is far better to invest a modest, consistent amount than to aim for a large amount and fail to sustain it. A person who invests 10% of their income without fail every month for 30 years will massively outperform a person who intends to invest 20% but actually contributes irregularly, missing months during difficult patches, stopping during crises, restarting and stopping again. Consistency is the variable that matters most, not the amount, not the strategy. Consistency. This has an important practical implication. When you are setting up your automatic investment system, be honest with yourself about what level of contribution is genuinely sustainable for your current life. If you are early in your career, if your income is not yet high, if you have real financial pressures, a smaller consistent amount is infinitely more valuable than a larger aspirational amount that you will not actually maintain. Set the automation at the level that you can genuinely commit to today, with the intention of increasing it as your income grows. And when your income grows, which it will, through promotions and career development, and the natural trajectory of most working lives, do not let lifestyle inflation absorb the entire increase. This is one of the great wealth-building strategies, and it requires almost no sacrifice because it asks you only not to spend money you have never yet spent. Every time your income increases, commit a meaningful portion of that increase to the automatic investment system before that portion ever appears in your budget. Increase your contribution percentage with every raise. Over the course of a career, this single habit can add hundreds of thousands of units to your final wealth position simply by capturing income growth before it converts into lifestyle cost. The automatic wealth machine, once built and running, does not require your constant attention, but it does require something important. It requires that you leave it alone, that you do not tinker with it during market downturns, that you do not stop it during difficult personal financial periods unless there is truly no other option, that you do not move money out of it when something else seems more exciting. The most valuable thing you can do with your Freedom portfolio, once it is properly set up, is almost nothing. Watch it. Review it periodically to make sure it remains aligned with your goals and timeline. Rebalance it when the proportions drift significantly from your target, but otherwise, leave it alone. Let time and compounding do their work. This discipline, the discipline of inaction, is genuinely difficult in a world that rewards activity and celebrates decisiveness. But in investing, as the research consistently shows, less action generally produces better outcomes. The investor who checks their portfolio quarterly and makes adjustments once a year typically outperforms the investor who checks daily and makes dozens of decisions. The investor who stays fully invested through every storm typically outperforms the investor who moves to cash whenever the headlines are frightening. The automatic wealth machine is not passive in the sense of being indifferent. You care deeply about your future. You have made thoughtful decisions about your portfolio structure, your account types, your contribution levels. But having made those decisions wisely, you then trust the process, remove your hands from the controls, and let the machine do what machines do. Work steadily, quietly, and without drama, building something significant over time. Chapter 6. Debt, the enemy of compounding. Everything we have discussed so far about compound growth has been positive. Compound growth, working in your favor, is the engine of wealth. But it is time to spend some careful time on the other side of the equation, the compounding that works against you. Debt is one of the most complex emotional topics in personal finance. It carries shame for many people. It feels like proof of failure, of irresponsibility, of not being good enough with money. But the Freedom Portfolio approach to debt is not moralistic. It is mathematical. And the mathematics are actually quite clarifying. Not all debt is equal. This is the first and most important thing to understand. There is debt that works against your wealth building, sometimes ferociously, and there is debt that is essentially neutral, or even, in certain circumstances, a tool that can be used intelligently. The difference lies primarily in the interest rate. High-interest debt, of the kind found on consumer credit cards in many countries, is almost always a financial emergency. Interest rates on this type of debt are typically several times higher than the expected long-term return on any investment. What that means, mathematically, is this. If you are paying, say, 20% interest on a credit card balance, while your investments are earning 8% annually, you are experiencing a net financial loss of 12% on every unit of money that remains in debt rather than paying off that debt. No investment strategy in the world can reliably overcome that gap. This is why the first step in the Freedom Portfolio is not investing at all. The first step is eliminating all high-interest debt. Every unit of money used to eliminate a 20% debt provides a guaranteed 20% return. Guaranteed. Because you are eliminating a cost that was certain. You can never get a guaranteed 20% return from any investment, but you can get it from eliminating a 20% interest obligation. This is not even a close mathematical question. Eliminating high-interest debt is, dollar for dollar, the highest return action available to most people carrying it. Now let us talk about lower interest debt, because the picture there is more nuanced. Mortgage debt on a primary residence, in most historical environments, carries an interest rate that is below the long-term expected return of a diversified stock portfolio. This means that mathematically, it may not be optimal to aggressively pay down a mortgage early rather than investing that money. If your mortgage costs you 4% per year and your investments earn 8%, every unit of money directed toward extra mortgage repayment is theoretically earning you 4%, while it could be earning 8%. The differential is real. However, financial mathematics are not the only consideration. The psychological value of being completely debt-free, including on a mortgage, is real and significant for many people. Debt creates stress. Debt creates vulnerability. A person who owns their home outright has a dramatically different relationship with employment risk, for example, than a person with a large mortgage payment. The freedom of genuinely having no debt obligations has value that does not appear in a spreadsheet, but absolutely appears in the quality of a life. The Freedom Portfolio does not prescribe a single answer for every person on the question of mortgage repayment. It asks you to understand both the mathematics and the psychology, and to make the choice that best serves your actual freedom, not just your theoretical financial optimization. For many people, a balanced approach works well, making standard mortgage payments while simultaneously investing in the portfolio, so that both progress toward debt freedom and investment growth are happening in parallel. Student debt deserves its own attention because it has become one of the defining financial features of young adult life in many parts of the world. The mathematics for student debt are similar to those for mortgage debt. If the interest rate is relatively low, it may be better to make minimum or standard payments and invest the rest. If the interest rate is high, aggressive repayment becomes more attractive. The specific calculation depends on the interest rate on your loans, the expected return on your investments, the tax deductibility of your student loan interest, and your personal comfort with carrying debt. What is important here is to not let student debt become the reason for indefinitely postponing the start of investing. The early years of investing are, as we established, the most valuable because of the time available for compounding. Waiting until student debt is fully paid before beginning to invest could cost you years of critical early compounding. In most cases, a parallel strategy, contributing to an employer-matched retirement account while making regular loan payments, is more valuable than a sequential strategy of eliminating debt first and investing after. One final type of debt deserves mention: the debt that is used to invest. Borrowing money to invest in financial assets, sometimes called investing on margin or using leverage, amplifies both gains and losses. When investments go up, leveraged portfolios gain more than unlevered ones. When investments go down, leveraged portfolios lose more. Sometimes, far more. The use of investment leverage by ordinary individual investors, particularly in volatile markets, has destroyed more wealth than it has created. The Freedom Portfolio does not use leverage. It does not borrow to invest. It builds wealth slowly and surely, without the risk of being wiped out by a bad year at the wrong time. The wealth built this way is solid. It is not spectacular. It does not have the dramatic returns that leveraged investors post during bull markets. But it also does not have the spectacular losses. And in the long run, avoiding catastrophic losses turns out to be at least as important to final wealth as capturing maximum gains. A portfolio that grows steadily and never suffers a devastating blow will often outperform a portfolio that climbs aggressively but occasionally falls close to zero and has to rebuild. Debt is not a moral failure. It is a financial condition. And like any condition, it can be diagnosed accurately and treated effectively. The Freedom Portfolio treats debt not with shame, but with strategy. Eliminate what destroys value quickly. Manage what is neutral intelligently, and never add what introduces catastrophic risk. Chapter 7. The Psychology of Wealth. We have spent considerable time on the mechanics of the Freedom Portfolio, on index funds, account types, compounding, debt management, and automated investment systems. These mechanics matter, but they are not the hardest part of building wealth. The hardest part is the part that happens between your ears. Financial psychology, the study of how human beings actually think and feel about money, and how those thoughts and feelings affect financial behavior, is a relatively young but extraordinarily important field. What researchers in this field have found, consistently and across cultures, is that human beings are not rational economic actors. We are emotional, pattern-seeking, loss-averse, status-conscious creatures whose instincts about money were shaped by evolutionary pressures that have almost nothing to do with long-term wealth accumulation. Let us talk about the most powerful and most dangerous of these instincts: loss aversion. Loss aversion is the well-documented tendency for human beings to feel losses about twice as strongly, emotionally, as they feel equivalent gains. A loss of 100 units of wealth feels, psychologically, roughly twice as bad as a gain of 100 units feels good. This asymmetry has been measured in hundreds of studies and appears to be deeply wired into how we process risk and reward. In everyday life, this instinct serves certain useful purposes, but in investing, it is catastrophically counterproductive, because it means that when your portfolio is falling in value, the emotional pain you feel is disproportionately larger than the rational mathematical significance of the movement. A 10% fall in portfolio value does not represent a 10% fall in your long-term wealth prospects if you do not sell. It represents a temporary paper loss that will, based on all historical evidence, eventually be recovered. But the emotional experience of that fall feels catastrophic. And the instinct it triggers, get out, reduce the pain, protect yourself, is the exact opposite of the financially correct response. Loss aversion is why markets have a recurring pattern of ordinary investors buying at high prices when everything feels safe and selling at low prices when everything feels terrifying. It is why the average individual investor in many markets earns significantly less than the market itself returns over the same period, not because they chose bad investments, but because they made emotionally driven timing decisions that systematically caused them to buy high and sell low. The Freedom Portfolio addresses loss aversion in multiple ways. Automation removes the need for an active sell decision during downturns. A well-aligned portfolio that you understand and believe in makes it easier to endure volatility without panicking. And education, the kind provided throughout this book, provides a rational framework that can sometimes override the emotional response when it arrives. Not always, not easily, but enough to make a difference over a lifetime of investing. Another powerful psychological force is social comparison. Human beings are intensely social creatures, and we calibrate our perception of our own well-being largely by comparing ourselves to those around us. This has obvious evolutionary roots, but creates significant problems for long-term wealth building. When you see colleagues buying larger homes, friends driving expensive cars, and social media feeds full of exotic vacations and designer goods, the social pressure to match that level of visible consumption is powerful. And it directly competes with the investment discipline required to build the Freedom Portfolio. The truth about wealth, the genuine truth that is almost never visible on social media, is that visible consumption and actual wealth are often inversely related. The person with the expensive car and the large mortgage and the designer wardrobe is often, behind the scenes, carrying enormous debt, living paycheck to paycheck despite a significant income, and building essentially nothing for the future. The person driving a modest car, living in a reasonable home, and quietly maxing out their investment accounts every year is almost never visible. Their wealth is invisible precisely because it is not being spent. But it is there, growing, compounding, building toward a future that will look profoundly different from their peers who spent everything on visible status. The Freedom Portfolio asks you to be comfortable with invisible wealth, to find satisfaction in a number on a screen, in a trajectory that you can see even if no one else can. This is genuinely difficult in a culture that celebrates consumption. But it is not impossible. And it becomes easier as the portfolio grows, as the number on the screen becomes undeniably significant, as the freedom it represents becomes more and more concrete and close. Patience is the third psychological challenge. We live in an era of extraordinary convenience, of immediate gratification, of next-day delivery, and instant streaming, and real-time communication. Everything in modern life is optimized for now. Wealth building is optimized for later, much later. The rewards of the Freedom Portfolio arrive not in months, but in decades. And asking a human brain that is wired for immediate reward to delay gratification consistently for 30 or 40 years is asking a lot. This is why the framing of the Freedom Portfolio matters. The goal is not sacrifice. The goal is not waiting decades for a reward while living in deprivation now. The goal is designing a life that is genuinely good right now and getting dramatically better over time. The money invested is not money you are depriving yourself of. It is money you are deploying into a system that is working every single day on your behalf. It is money that is, right now, at this moment, growing. It is on your team. It is fighting for your future. And that reframe, from sacrifice to deployment, from delay to investment, can make an enormous difference in how sustainable the habit feels over time. There is also the concept of financial identity, how you see yourself in relation to money, and how that self-image shapes your behavior. People who think of themselves as bad with money tend to behave in ways that confirm that identity. People who have internalized a story of financial failure, maybe from watching parents struggle, or from their own early mistakes, or from persistent cultural messages about who gets to have money, often unconsciously act to maintain that story's truth. The Freedom Portfolio is, among other things, an invitation to adopt a new identity. You are not someone who will never get ahead. You are someone who is building a freedom portfolio. You have a system. You are executing it. You are accumulating assets. The identity shifts slowly, but it shifts, and as it shifts, the behaviors that support it become more natural and more sustainable. One more psychological dimension deserves careful attention: the role of simplicity itself. Complexity creates anxiety. Anxiety leads to avoidance. Avoidance leads to inaction. And inaction, in investing, is the most expensive mistake of all. The Freedom Portfolio is deliberately, intentionally, stubbornly simple. Not because complexity is not available, not because there are no more sophisticated strategies to be explored, but because a system you can understand completely is a system you can trust. A system you can trust is a system you can maintain. And a system you maintain for 30 years will beat the most theoretically sophisticated system that you cannot emotionally hold on to through a single serious market correction. Chapter 8: Building Your Freedom Number. At some point in the journey, the question of how much is enough becomes pressing. Not in a way that signals greed or obsession, but in a genuinely practical sense. How large does the Freedom Portfolio need to grow before it generates enough to support your life without requiring you to trade your time for income? This question has an answer, not a perfect answer, because it depends on variables specific to your life, but a clear and well-researched starting framework. And understanding that framework, arriving at your own personal freedom number, gives the entire project a target, a destination that makes the journey feel real and measurable and attainable. The framework is called the 4% Rule. It emerged from a rigorous historical study of withdrawal rates from investment portfolios across various market conditions. What the researchers found, looking at decades of historical data, is that a portfolio invested in a diversified mix of stocks and bonds could sustain annual withdrawals of 4% of the initial portfolio value, adjusted for inflation each year, for a period of at least 30 years, across essentially all historical scenarios they tested. What this means in practical terms is that if you know approximately how much you need each year to live your chosen life, you can divide that amount by 4%, or equivalently, multiply it by 25, to arrive at the portfolio size that would support you indefinitely at that lifestyle level without depleting the principal. This is your freedom number, the point at which the portfolio, through its ongoing growth, generates more income than you need. Let us work through a simple example. Imagine you determine that your chosen life, the life in which you have genuine freedom of time and choice, requires a certain annual amount to sustain comfortably. Multiply that annual amount by 25. The resulting number is your freedom number, the size your freedom portfolio needs to reach before you have the option, not the obligation, but the option, to step away from trading time for income. This is important. The freedom number is the point at which work becomes genuinely optional, not necessarily the point at which you stop working. Many people who reach their freedom number continue to work because they love what they do, because continued income allows the portfolio to grow even further, because engagement and purpose are valuable independent of income. But the relationship with work transforms entirely when it is optional. You no longer work because you must. You work because you choose to. And that shift, subtle as it sounds, is profound. It changes the nature of every workday, every professional relationship, every career decision. Different people will arrive at very different freedom numbers because the annual income requirement varies enormously based on lifestyle, location, family size, and personal priorities. There is no right answer. Someone who has designed a life of genuine simplicity and contentment, who lives in a relatively low-cost area, whose children are grown and independent, might reach their freedom number at a surprisingly modest portfolio size. Someone with a high-cost lifestyle, a large family, expensive obligations, and specific aspirations might require a much larger number. The calculation is personal, but the framework is universal. There is a refinement worth considering here, which concerns the difference between a portfolio that is sufficient and a portfolio that is robust. The 4% rule was developed based on historical data and assumes a 30-year retirement horizon. But many people pursuing financial freedom are doing so earlier in life, which means the portfolio needs to sustain withdrawals for longer than 30 years, potentially for 40 or 50 years. This extended horizon calls for a slightly more conservative initial withdrawal rate, perhaps 3 to 3.5%, which correspondingly means a slightly larger required portfolio. The multiply by 25 framework becomes multiply by 28 or multiply by 30. This is not meant to discourage. It is meant to help you set a target that is genuinely achievable, rather than one that looks like freedom on paper but turns out to be fragile in practice. A portfolio that sustains your freedom for decades without requiring either dramatic luck or uncomfortable deprivation is worth a little extra time to build. And since we have already established that the early years of compounding are the most powerful, starting earlier and allowing more time to build is always the superior strategy. Knowing your freedom number does something powerful beyond giving you a target. It gives you a framework for making decisions. Every spending choice, every career decision, every financial trade-off can be evaluated not just in terms of today's pleasure or convenience, but in terms of its effect on your trajectory toward your freedom number. This is not meant to be a life of constant calculation and sacrifice, but it is meant to be a life of clarity, where you understand the relationship between your present choices and your future freedom. The journey to the freedom number is not a straight line. There will be market years that set you back. There will be personal financial events that require drawing on resources you had planned to invest. There will be years of remarkable growth that feel almost too good to be true. All of this is normal. All of it is part of the path. What matters is not that the line on your graph points upward every single year. What matters is that the direction, over time, over the full arc of the journey, is consistently toward the number. Chapter 9: Life Events and the Freedom Portfolio. No financial plan survives contact with real life entirely unchanged. The Freedom Portfolio is robust and flexible by design, but there are specific life events that require thoughtful adjustment, and understanding how to handle them preserves the integrity of the system through the inevitable turbulence of a human life. Marriage, or the formation of any committed financial partnership, is one of the most significant financial events most people experience. It is also one of the most underplanned. Two people bring two financial histories, two sets of habits, two sets of beliefs about money, and two sets of goals into a shared life. Without honest conversation about these things, and without some structural planning, even couples who are deeply compatible in every other way can find themselves in painful conflict about money. The Freedom Portfolio approach to partnership finances is to begin with transparency. Complete, honest, no judgment transparency about the current financial state of both partners. What are the assets? What are the debts? What are the income and expenses? What are the goals and timelines? What are the fears and the stories about money each person carries from their history? This conversation, while sometimes uncomfortable, is essential, because building a shared financial system on top of unspoken misalignments is building on sand. Many couples find that a combination of shared and individual financial management works best: a shared account for joint expenses and joint goals, and individual accounts for personal spending that does not require joint agreement. This structure respects both the partnership and the individuality within it. The key is that the Freedom Portfolio, as a long-term wealth-building system, needs to be a shared priority and a shared commitment, even if the specific implementation involves both individual and joint accounts. Children are perhaps the most financially transformative event in most people's lives, and the financial implications are both immediate and long-term. The immediate costs of having children are significant and should be planned for honestly. But the long-term financial implications for the parent's Freedom Portfolio are equally important to consider. Years of reduced income for a caregiving parent, years of increased expenses, and the question of how much financial support to provide for children's own education and future all require thoughtful integration into the financial plan. The Freedom Portfolio principle here is a version of the airplane oxygen mask instruction: secure your own financial security before attempting to fund your children's. An investor who sacrifices their own retirement savings to fund their children's education is doing something that feels noble but may actually be harmful, because it creates a situation where the children must eventually support the parents financially, or the parents must live in financial insecurity in later life. Children can borrow for education if necessary. They can earn. They can receive scholarships. No one lends money for retirement. The parent's own portfolio must come first. That said, education savings vehicles, which exist in various forms in many countries, allowing money to grow tax-free when used for educational expenses, are a valuable addition to the family financial plan where they exist. Contributing modest amounts regularly to such vehicles from the time a child is young can grow, through compound interest, into a meaningful contribution to education costs by the time it is needed. Job loss is a financial event that can feel catastrophic, but with proper preparation, is survivable without derailing the Freedom Portfolio permanently. The single most important protection against job loss is the emergency fund, a pool of liquid cash held in a safe, accessible account, separate from the investment portfolio, large enough to cover 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses. The emergency fund is not an investment. It does not need to grow aggressively. Its job is to be there, reliably and quickly accessible when the unexpected happens. It is the financial shock absorber that allows you to handle a job loss or a sudden large expense without having to sell your investments at whatever price they happen to be at the moment of the crisis. Building the emergency fund is actually part of the foundation phase of the Freedom Portfolio, which comes before aggressive investment begins. The sequence matters. Eliminate high-interest debt, build the emergency fund, then maximize tax-advantaged investment contributions, then invest additional amounts in taxable accounts. This sequence is designed to ensure that the investment phase is not derailed by foreseeable emergencies. Divorce, if it occurs, is one of the most financially disruptive events in personal finance. It typically splits a portfolio that was growing as a unit, introduces legal costs, and fundamentally changes the financial circumstances of both parties. The Freedom Portfolio approach to divorce is to understand that the system can be rebuilt even after significant disruption. The principles do not change. The urgency to rebuild, if anything, increases. And the clarity of having a system to return to, rather than having to invent a new financial approach from scratch, is enormously helpful during what is already an emotionally difficult time. Inheritance is a financial event that many people encounter at some point in their lives, sometimes expectedly, and sometimes with very little warning. The arrival of a sudden significant sum of money creates what is sometimes called the windfall problem, the pressure to do something decisive and potentially risky with money that feels different from money you earned. The Freedom Portfolio approach to a windfall is deliberate patience. Do not act immediately. Place the money in a safe, liquid vehicle while you think clearly. Then, integrate it into your existing portfolio strategy systematically, using a process called dollar cost averaging over a period of months to reduce the risk of investing a large lump sum at a market high. Windfalls, handled thoughtfully, can meaningfully accelerate the journey to the freedom number. Handled impulsively, they can be lost to poor decisions made under the emotional weight of sudden change. Illness, whether of yourself or a family member, introduces both financial costs and, often, reduced income. Health insurance and disability insurance are forms of protection that the Freedom Portfolio framework explicitly includes. We will discuss insurance in more detail in the next chapter. For now, the key principle is that protecting the earning capacity that funds the portfolio is as important as managing the portfolio itself. A freedom portfolio that grows beautifully while you are healthy but collapses if your health falters is not truly a freedom portfolio. Proper insurance coverage is a foundational element of the system. Chapter 10. The Protection Layer. Every great structure requires protection from the forces that could damage or destroy it. For buildings, that means foundations and walls and roofs. For bodies, that means immune systems and medicine. For the Freedom Portfolio, the protection layer is insurance. Insurance is, in its purest form, a system for converting unpredictable large losses into predictable small costs. You pay a regular premium to an insurer, and in exchange, if a specific catastrophic event occurs, the insurer covers the financial impact. This trade, small certain cost for protection against large uncertain loss, is one of the most rational financial transactions available. And yet many people are either underinsured, exposed to risks that could catastrophically damage their financial plan, or overinsured, paying for coverage they do not need or understand. Let us work through the forms of insurance that belong in a complete Freedom Portfolio protection layer. Health insurance is the first, and in many contexts, the most critical. A serious illness without health coverage can generate costs that exceed the entire value of a Freedom Portfolio, wiping out years or decades of patient wealth building in a matter of months. In environments where healthcare costs can be ruinous, maintaining comprehensive health insurance is not optional. It is foundational. The specific form this takes varies enormously depending on your country of residence, your employment situation, and the healthcare system in your context. What matters universally is that the coverage is real, comprehensive for serious events, and maintained without gaps. Disability insurance is significantly underappreciated by most people, and genuinely one of the most important protective instruments in the financial plan. Your ability to earn income is, early in your career, by far your most valuable financial asset. The value of all the income you will earn over your working life vastly exceeds the current value of your investment portfolio. If that income-generating capacity is eliminated or reduced by a disability, the impact on your freedom portfolio trajectory is severe. Disability insurance replaces a portion of your income if you are unable to work due to illness or injury. For someone in their working years with dependents and financial obligations, this coverage is essential. Life insurance requires careful thought because its need is highly situation dependent. If you have dependents, people whose financial well-being depends on your income, life insurance exists to protect them from the financial impact of your death. For someone without dependents, the financial case for life insurance is much weaker. The type of life insurance most appropriate for the Freedom Portfolio framework is term life insurance, coverage that lasts for a defined period, typically the years when dependents are financially vulnerable, at a relatively low cost. Permanent or whole life insurance, which combines insurance with a savings component, is far more expensive and is generally not recommended as a financial product within the Freedom Portfolio framework, because the savings component is usually a high-cost and low-return investment vehicle compared to the index funds at the core of the portfolio. Property insurance, covering your home and significant personal property against damage and loss, is straightforward and important. If you own a home, you almost certainly have a lender requiring you to maintain homeowner's insurance, but make sure the coverage is adequate, that it reflects the actual replacement cost of the structure and its contents, and that it includes liability protection. Gaps in property coverage can create significant financial exposure. Liability insurance, protecting you against claims from others for injury or property damage, deserves specific attention for anyone with meaningful assets. Standard homeowners and auto policies include some liability coverage, but the amounts are often not large enough to protect a significant freedom portfolio from a serious claim. An umbrella liability policy, which provides additional liability coverage above the limits of your standard policies at a remarkably low cost, is one of the most cost-effective protections available to anyone who has built meaningful wealth. The overarching principle of the protection layer is this: insure against risks that could be financially catastrophic, the large, low-probability events whose financial impact you genuinely could not absorb, and self-insure against risks that are merely inconvenient, the small, manageable events where the premium cost exceeds the real expected benefit over time. Your emergency fund handles the self-insured risks. Your insurance portfolio handles the catastrophic ones. Together, they form a complete protection layer that allows the Freedom Portfolio to operate through whatever life throws at it. Chapter 11. Navigating the Market. By now, you have a thorough understanding of what the Freedom Portfolio is made of, how it is set up, how it is automated, how it is protected, and what it is growing toward. But there is one dimension of the experience of being a long-term investor that no amount of intellectual preparation fully neutralizes: the visceral, sometimes terrifying reality of living through market cycles. Markets are not smoothly efficient mechanisms. They are, in the short term, driven by the collective emotions of millions of participants, by greed and fear, by narratives and headlines, by events no one predicted, and reactions no one fully understood in advance. The result is a pattern that looks, in the short term, like chaos: sharp rises, sudden crashes, grinding sideways movements, volatile swings that seem to signal both doom and euphoria within the span of weeks. Understanding the anatomy of a market cycle is one of the most valuable things a long-term investor can do, because it transforms the experience of living through one from terrifying randomness into recognizable pattern. The cycle typically begins in a period of recovery from a previous downturn. Prices are low. Sentiment is poor. The news is still full of warnings. Most ordinary investors have sold or reduced their exposure. But underneath the surface, values are attractive, fundamentals are recovering, and the patient investors who held through the downturn are beginning to see their portfolios recover. As the recovery gains momentum, optimism grows. More investors return to the market. Prices rise. The news becomes more positive. Stories of people making money in the market begin to circulate. More capital flows in. Prices rise further. This phase, the expansion, can last for years and produces genuine wealth for those who are invested. Then comes the peak. Prices are high. Valuations are stretched. Optimism has become euphoria. Everyone seems to be talking about investing. People who have never shown interest in markets before are asking about how to get in. The very investors who were paralyzed with fear at the bottom are now buying eagerly at the top, because now it feels safe. The contraction follows. It can be triggered by any number of catalysts: rising interest rates, geopolitical events, unexpected economic data, the bursting of a specific bubble. The specific trigger is almost never predictable in advance, which is one of the reasons that timing the market is so futile. Prices begin to fall. At first, this feels like a healthy correction. Then, it deepens. Then, it becomes a full-scale sell-off. The headlines become alarming. Experts appear with theories about why this time is different, why the old rules no longer apply, why the market may not recover. Fear spreads. The investors who bought at the top begin to sell at increasingly large losses. The cycle approaches its bottom. And then, eventually, a recovery begins. Quietly, without announcement, usually when the mood is still deeply negative and the news is still frightening. The cycle starts again. For the Freedom Portfolio investor, the correct behavior at every stage of this cycle is essentially the same. Continue your automatic contributions. Maintain your allocation. Do not sell in panic. Do not stop in fear. The cycle is not a threat to the Freedom Portfolio. It is the environment in which the Freedom Portfolio operates. And the investor who understands this, who has internalized not just intellectually, but emotionally the pattern of markets over time, is far better equipped to hold steady through the frightening phases. There is a specific experience worth preparing for: the first serious market correction you live through as an investor. No matter how thoroughly you have read about market crashes, no matter how confident you felt when you set up your portfolio, the first time you watch a significant portion of your wealth evaporate on paper in a short period of time, the emotional impact is real. Intellectual preparation helps. Automation helps. But the best preparation is going through it once and experiencing firsthand that the world does not end, that the recovery comes, and that the investors who held gained everything back and more, while the investors who sold remained behind. After your first serious correction, you will be a different kind of investor. More seasoned, more genuinely confident, not arrogantly confident, because markets will always have the capacity to surprise, but quietly certain, based on experience rather than theory, that the system works through the hard times as well as the easy ones. And that certainty is one of the most valuable things a long-term investor can possess. Chapter 12: The Freedom Portfolio for Every Stage of Life. A financial system that works only for one type of person at one stage of life is not a system. It is a snapshot. The Freedom Portfolio is designed to evolve with you, adjusting an emphasis and proportion as your life changes, while maintaining the core principles that make it effective at every stage. In your early working years, the period from your mid-20s into your late 30s, the primary emphasis of the Freedom Portfolio is building the foundation. This means eliminating any high-interest debt, establishing the emergency fund, and beginning to invest consistently in a high-equity portfolio that benefits fully from the long timeline ahead. In this phase, the amount invested matters less than the consistency and the structure. Starting the automatic system, choosing low-cost index funds, understanding the principles, developing the identity and the habits that will sustain the journey. The early years are also the time to maximize the use of employer-matched retirement contributions. If your employer matches your retirement contributions up to a certain percentage, those matching contributions represent a return of 100% on the matched amount, which is the highest guaranteed return available anywhere. Not contributing enough to capture the full match is leaving free money on the table. And in a book about building wealth, leaving free money on the table is as close to a definitive mistake as anything we can identify. In your middle working years, roughly from your late 30s through your early 50s, the emphasis shifts to acceleration. Income is typically higher. Major expenses may still be significant, particularly if children are in the picture, but the financial foundation should be solid enough to allow meaningful increases in investment contributions. This is the phase where increasing your savings rate with every income increase, rather than allowing lifestyle inflation to absorb the gains, can make an enormous difference to your ultimate portfolio size. The portfolio is now large enough that its own growth is contributing meaningfully to its expansion. The compounding engine is visible and running, and the freedom number may be beginning to feel genuinely within reach. In these middle years, it is also worth beginning to think about portfolio allocation in a slightly more nuanced way. If you have a very long timeline, allocating almost entirely to stocks may have been appropriate in your early years. As you move through your 40s and into your 50s, a gradual shift toward a slightly more balanced allocation, incorporating a growing bond component, begins to make sense. Not a dramatic shift, not a move into a conservative allocation that sacrifices growth prematurely, but a gentle, incremental progression that reduces the volatility of the portfolio as the timeline shortens. In the final working years, roughly from your early 50s onward, the Freedom portfolio enters what might be called the preservation and transition phase. The portfolio is large. The compounding engine has been running for decades and is generating significant growth. The freedom number may be close or may already have been reached. The focus now turns to ensuring that the portfolio is structured to sustain the withdrawal phase without undue risk. This typically involves a more meaningful shift toward bonds and other stabilizing assets, as well as careful tax planning for the transition from accumulation to distribution. The order in which different account types are drawn upon in retirement, which accounts to spend first, which to preserve for longer, has meaningful tax implications that are worth understanding and planning for. The general principle is to manage your taxable income in retirement carefully, drawing from different account types strategically to minimize overall lifetime tax liability. There is a phenomenon worth naming here, sometimes called the sequence of returns risk, that is particularly relevant in the years immediately before and after transitioning to the distribution phase. If your portfolio experiences a serious market decline in the early years of your withdrawal period, the combination of a falling portfolio value and ongoing withdrawals can put the long-term sustainability of the portfolio at serious risk. A large fall early in the distribution phase, before the portfolio has had time to recover, forces you to sell more shares at lower prices to meet your withdrawal needs, which permanently reduces the number of shares available to benefit from the eventual recovery. This risk is real and worth protecting against. The strategies include maintaining a somewhat larger bond buffer in the years around the transition, holding a portion of the portfolio in cash equivalents sufficient to cover a year or more of expenses without having to sell stocks at depressed prices, and being flexible about withdrawal amounts during serious market downturns, temporarily reducing expenses to allow the portfolio more time to recover without forced selling. Every stage of the Freedom Portfolio journey has its own challenges and its own opportunities. But the thread running through all of them is the same: the consistent application of a simple, sound, long-term system, adapted intelligently to the realities of each phase, and maintained through every kind of weather with the confidence that comes from genuinely understanding why it works. Chapter 13. The Legacy of the Freedom Portfolio. We have traveled a long way together through these pages. We have dismantled the myths that keep people from starting. We have explored the physics of compound growth and the mechanics of index investing. We have designed a portfolio structure, an account strategy, an automation system, a protection layer, and a psychological framework. We have navigated the stages of life and the cycles of markets. What remains is the most human question of all. What is this actually for? Financial freedom, at its fullest expression, is not about the number. It is about what the number makes possible. It is about the Tuesday morning when you wake up and genuinely choose how to spend your day. It is about the creative work that goes unpursued when financial pressure demands safe choices. It is about the parent who can be genuinely present for their child because they are not consumed by financial anxiety. It is about the community you can support, the causes you can fund, the people you can help, once your own foundation is solid. There is also, for many people who build the Freedom Portfolio to its fullest extent, a powerful legacy dimension. The portfolio you build over your lifetime does not have to end with you. The habits of clear thinking, patient investing, and intentional living can be transmitted to the next generation in a way that breaks the cycle of financial anxiety and ignorance that many families have carried for generations. Teaching the young people in your life the principles of this book, while they are young enough for the knowledge to create maximum impact, is one of the most meaningful financial gifts imaginable. Not financial gifts in the form of money, though those can be part of the legacy too, but gifts in the form of understanding. The knowledge that wealth is built through system and patience rather than brilliance and luck. The understanding of compound growth and the profound value of time. The habit of saving and investing before spending. The emotional tools to hold steady through market volatility. The clarity to distinguish between true financial needs and socially manufactured wants. These gifts, freely given to a young person at the beginning of their financial journey, could change the entire trajectory of their life. Could mean the difference between a life lived in financial anxiety and one lived with genuine freedom. And if that transmission happens, if the principles in this book travel from your hands to the next generation, the Freedom Portfolio becomes more than a wealth-building tool. It becomes a legacy of liberation. But let us not lose sight of the simplest and most immediate purpose of the Freedom Portfolio, which is this: to give you back your time. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource in a human life. Money, lost, can be rebuilt. Time, spent, cannot be reclaimed. The Freedom Portfolio is, at its core, a time machine, a mechanism for purchasing your own future time with your current financial discipline. Every unit of currency added to the portfolio today is a future unit of time that belongs to you, free of obligation, free of the need to trade hours for income. The portfolio grows, the freedom number approaches, and one day, the time you have been purchasing one investment at a time, one automated contribution at a time, one steady year at a time, will arrive. Not as an event, but as a dawning. A quiet morning when you realize that the structure you built has done its work, that you are free. The freedom you have been building is not the freedom to do nothing. Most people who reach financial independence find that they want to continue being productive, purposeful, and engaged with the world. But the nature of that engagement changes entirely when it is chosen rather than required. The work you do from freedom is different from the work you do from necessity. It is more creative, more genuine, more aligned with who you actually are. It is the difference between a life lived on your terms and a life lived on everyone else's. This is what the Freedom Portfolio is for. Not the numbers, the life. The quiet, unshakable, deeply personal sense of possibility that comes from knowing your future is secured and your time is your own. Begin today, not tomorrow, not when the conditions feel better, Today, open an account. Make the first contribution. Set up the first automatic transfer. Take the first step of the journey that ends in genuine freedom. The mathematics will handle the rest, slowly at first, then with gathering power, over more time than you can fully imagine, but less than you think you can spare. The Freedom Portfolio. Your simple system for lifelong wealth. It is ready when you are.